This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Hello and welcome to the HR in Review podcast with me, Verity Goff, your host. I am here to talk about all things HR and the world of work, and today I'm going to be joined by Maria Hoeritzauer. I hope I've said that right, Hoeritzauer. She's a partner at the Crossland Employment Solicitors, and we're going to be talking about kind of the HR compliance law snapshot with lots of changes coming in at the moment. So Maria's going to do her best to help me delve into that and try and package it up a little bit more for everybody. I'll just give you a quick intro to Maria. She's been qualified since 2007. Her experience includes working in private practice in top-tier law firms in the Thames Valley region and London. She's acted for a wide range of clients, including senior executives, startup entities, local businesses, multinationals, goodness me, publicly listed companies, and now as a partner at the Oxfordshire-based Crossland Employment Solicitors. Maria advises on a wide range of HR and employment-related matters. This is things like executive service agreements, disciplinary, restrictive covenants, which I don't even know what they are, board level disputes, performance management, discrimination, restructuring exercises and contentious matters, employment tribunals. Basically, it sounds like anything to do with employment law. Maria, you're all over it. Have I missed anything at all from that? And welcome.
No, I'm impressed by myself.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, obviously, we just before we started recording, we were talking about some of the changes, and it's a bit of a hotbed for HR at the moment. In the last 2 years, or last year and this year, there's been all kinds of new things happening, bubbling away. So the idea with our chat today is just to really understand a little bit about perhaps how they can make sure they're complying, what seems to be working, what's not working, and your opinion on some of these things as well. So let's jump in first and ask you, could you give me a kind of a high-level overview of the biggest changes that we've seen coming in and are kind of unraveling at the moment?
So obviously we had a number of significant changes last year, and I know we're planning to double back on that. This year, every April, the government releases new figures. So those are figures that are used for calculating redundancies and unfair dismissal compensation values and so on. I think the biggest thing that I really want to flag to everybody, I think we all need to be really aware of it as HR practitioners and employers, is that so ACAS has produced a code of practice for dismissal and re-engagement. Now that's essentially the fire and rehire, which is an awful label that we've seen in previous years. So ACAS, the independent mediation service, produced a code of practice on that to make sure that everybody was trying to go through a fair and reasonable process before they got to the point of dismissing. The code of practice has been in place for a while, but what is new as of this year, as of January 2025, is that if you're an employer and you fail to comply with that, and the employee goes to the tribunal and they succeed, the tribunal can actually award an uplift of 25% more on any compensation that's awarded if you haven't complied with that code. So for all of us who are working with employers of any shape and size, it's really important that we make sure that we've thought about that and that we know we're trying to comply. It's just to reduce risk. That's the biggest thing that is causing sleepless nights in my life at the moment. Yeah, so that's the biggest thing that's coming. Now, obviously, we've got the Employment Rights Bill that's coming up. It's getting a lot of noise as well. They're very
but that's actually what I was going to ask you. So the Employment Rights Bill, that's what we're hearing from people within the HR journalism side of things. From our point of view, we hear lots and lots of chatter about it. Do you think there's parts of it that should have been left out or added? I know the amendments are ongoing, but do you think it's going far enough in protecting workers' rights at the moment? What's your view on the bill?
I mean, the first thing is, as you've said, there's so much talk about it. And I think there are some elements that are getting much more noise than others, but it's a huge number of changes that have been proposed. I think it does go. It provides a lot of clarification and extended rights for employees. I think what I would have liked to have seen is some guidance or maybe some consideration given to post-termination restrictions. So those are restrictive covenants that you mentioned at this top. I'll always try and get the conversation round to these. I'm such a geek. So, essentially these are restrictions that we have in our employment contracts that might, for example, say for a period of time after you leave your employer, you cannot go to a competitor. You cannot encourage your former colleagues to come and leave that organization. And those are designed to protect an organization's workforce, their information, their client relationships, their position in the market. And I think that's something that actually we would have all benefited from having a bit of scrutiny looked at that, some guidance to say, 3 months is a reasonable period of time for this type of restriction, this period. But that's me personally. I think that would have helped.
Well, that's an interesting one, because I suppose it's not always something you immediately think of when you think of employment rights and what have you. You're not necessarily thinking of that area, the covenant area, which now I know more about. Thank you. So looking at those particular laws that happen, now we know that in last year we also had a lot of changes in the law. So, like I said, it's just ongoing at the moment. So what do you see that has happened from last year? So we know, like, flexible working, the changes from that. We have the carers leave, redundancy protections, that kind of thing. How have you seen that play out for HR? What are you hearing?
So carers leave, I haven't heard much of that, of any requests for that. Now, it may be that that's because all of the HR practitioners and the managers who deal with employees have been absolutely on it and gotten their policies in place and communicated that to employees. I suspect that actually it's either been ignored, or people have been put off by the fact that it's only for 1 week and it's unpaid unless your employer decides to pay more. What I would say is that it is actually really helpful. So at the moment, we've always historically had parental leave. So that's for those emergency times. You've got to take somebody to the hospital, or you couldn't have planned for it. Again, it's unpaid, but the carers leave is something that is given. Yes, it's unpaid and it's capped to 1 week in every 12 months, but it's for planned things and it can be taken for a day off. So if you've got a dependent, a child, for example, who you need to take to the hospital, that's exactly what it's there for. But I'm not hearing any discussion around it. So again, I don't know if that's simply that it's just gone under the radar because it's unpaid, or it's just not getting the noise that the flexible working request rights have got. So, and now that is something that I've seen a lot more of, because I think, especially as we've seen people being encouraged or forced to go back to the office more. That's where I'm seeing a lot of flexible working requests coming in, because we've automatically now got from day one, so you don't have to have any length of service requirement. Day one, right? You can make 2 flexible working requests every year compared to 1.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's almost a second bite of the cherry, or if your circumstances have changed.
Yeah.
So that's getting a lot more noise. I think also you mentioned the other change that's happened, the enhanced protections for those on family-related leave. So we're talking about it's primarily people who are on maternity leave or adoption leave, and whose roles are now identified as being redundant. So that lasts for a lot longer. I've seen that professionally coming in. That's a factor that HR professionals are very mindful of, which is a great thing. I just think that's something that we'll see more of that coming into play over the next 12
The ripple
months.
effect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. Yeah.
Before we were talking, you did mention another change that came in that you personally think needs a bit more talk about. Do you want to go into that? Was the sexual harassment?
Yes, the obligation to prevent, or to take reasonable steps as an employer to prevent sexual harassment. Um, there was talk. Now that came into place last October, and there was a bill. There were conversations. There were alerts and updates about them. But I think that um, again, and this is where HR practitioners are fantastic, because they will have made sure that the policies are there, or that at least that they're being introduced. I think that where there is a bit more work that we can do is making sure that we're training everybody, which of course the benefit of that is that if we end up with a discrimination claim, we then as an organisation can say, hang on, we've trained everybody, we've told them not to sexually harass their colleagues, for example, and you have that staff, which is always good. Um, but I think that that has not got the same traction, perhaps, and the idea that it's not enough for us just to have a policy. We have to be actually doing risk assessments, and again, not something that lives in a cupboard that nobody looks at.
Hmm.
Maybe putting signs up or on our recorded messages saying we don't tolerate abuse of our colleagues. I think that's something that actually has been probably just lost a little bit.
It's tying in a lot with the sort of rhetoric going on in general pop culture, media, and everything. You know, we're seeing lots of talk of this topic at the moment. You know, sort of um,
Yeah,
how it's affecting people and the narrative, as they say, uh, and that would be really really important
yeah.
for HR teams to sort of jump on, I guess. But yeah, I suppose it's not something that we bring to the fore a lot in HR conversations because of the nature of the topic, but obviously we shouldn't shy away from these things. So I guess training is probably one of the key things, communication training and just letting people know about zero tolerance policies and things like that, I suppose.
I think that we all presume, all of our colleagues and ourselves, that we're all behaving in a professional or courteous way. We don't necessarily anticipate how that might be perceived by others. So yeah, so I agree with you. Policies, training. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. You'd think a lot of it's obvious, but for some it's not, and we need to outline these things as much as possible. Well, in that respect, then, when you're talking about communicating things, dealing with policy, forming policy, educating teams, training, everything. Obviously, for big organisations, quite often they have big teams that will be dealing with this. There'll be somebody specifically dealing with compliance and law, and they don't have to worry about payroll. But they've got their focus. If you're in a smaller business, or you're somebody who needs to inform yourself for a very small organization, how are they going to stay on top of this? What essentials do they need, or what would your advice be to people who want to do that?
I think first of all, the knowledge, knowing that we need to do something, is the most important step. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. There are lots of free newsletters and webinars, and information that that everybody can access. So obviously there's lots of HR consultancies do their newsletters, or they might have something on LinkedIn. There's LinkedIn groups again for HR professionals. And that's actually quite a good way. Again, if you're traveling, you just quickly look in to see if somebody's put a post up. I think the other thing, and is simply perhaps maybe uh, diarising to do a review of employment contracts, or an audit of the staff handbook or policies, and you could do that even just put it in your diary for something to do if you know there's going to be a quiet period. Granted, that might be wishful thinking, but if you know that the first 2 weeks of January are always a bit dead in the office, actually maybe that's quite a good time just to say, right, okay, let's review our policies, and I'll just start gathering things together in advance to say, right, okay, these are the things that are coming in, and I think if we can build a peer support network. So if you know other HR practitioners locally, and again, there's solicitors and consultants who organise networking events, and that's a really useful way just to be able to touch base and sense check things, and potentially if somebody has a beautiful template that you can share it and just make it your own.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, there's podcasts. There's
there's
the HR media. We have
podcasts.
to remind. Of course. Yeah, thankfully, HR is a very interested industry that really makes itself informed about things, which is great. And, there does seem to be lots of resources out there. More so then, what about communicating it? So if you're in an HR team, you need to get these legal updates to line managers to make sure that they're consistently applied. So I know you mentioned like having notices up for like the zero tolerance policy, sexual harassment, but for maybe some of the other requests like the flexible working or the parental redundancy, whatever it might be that will have a direct effect on line managers, how would you suggest HR communicate that?
I think everybody knows their own line managers and their own organisation best. If you know that your line managers are so run off their feet that they're just not going to read an email that is a plethora of policies and so on, yes, send it. But I think that it's going to be more useful, perhaps, actually just to get everybody together or get them in different groups and say, I'm going to buy everybody coffee and I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what you need to know and where it is stored on the system, and who, perhaps most importantly, who you need to speak to if you're not sure. So it's things like, we've always said, haven't we, as HR professionals, the line managers need to know where to get information from. They need to know if that's actually, is that a whistleblowing protected disclosure that's come in the door, or is it a grievance, or is it something that is not any of those and needs to be dealt with in a different way. I mean, there is always training. There's external providers, ACAS, for example, have training. But I do honestly think that, again, maybe diarising to maybe have a quarterly or a 6 monthly catch up with managers from different parts of the organisation, just so that it's training. And obviously we're going to keep notes of that and who attended, because that keeps the organisation safe and for future claims. But it is just about making it really easy for people. I think that's, again, I mean, if you're in a small organisation, it might be literally just saying, right, on a Monday morning, I'm going to sit down with everybody with a couple of biscuits and I'm going to tell you about why you should be stopping sexual harassment and what we need to do.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, and it makes
Sorry, I'm being a bit facetious there, but it genuinely
it is, because everyone's time poor.
Yeah.
I know that people who are managers, they don't always factor into it all the HR and administrative, well, not administrative, but the law changes and stuff, the things that they will need to know about because they are directly dealing with employees. Yeah, and I suppose it's managing expectations of that as well, isn't it? That they do have that responsibility.
They do have that responsibility. They are the front line. But it's a really good point you've just flagged actually there. We also need to make sure that the managers and the senior team actually know about some of the things that are coming into place. I mentioned at the beginning about that ACAS code of practice. We also know that in the Employment Rights Bill, they're going to try and eliminate the right to fire and rehire, except in very particular circumstances. If we know, if we know if the HR team knows that there is a potential redundancy, restructuring, contractual change situation coming up, we need to be saying to the right people internally, look, this is a potential change that could come in, no guarantees, but it could be coming in early 2026. If we're going to make massive or significant changes to either our contract terms or the way that we're structured, we need to be thinking of that now. Let's not wait until the point where the law is passed and we are going to be in a much much riskier position.
Yeah, preempting changes. Well, I mean, it's not like we don't get, information about it. Like I said, if you're informed, if you're following, people that you respect, and you know that they have knowledge on these things, podcasts, magazines, whatever it might be, it is all there for you. So there's no real excuse to not be aware of these things. It's just the lack of time. A lot of people, but everybody's in that situation. So I don't know if we can always use that as an excuse these days, especially not when it comes to protection of employees and your workers and therefore your business. It does make financial sense as well, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
As well as obligations. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was any upcoming law changes that we need to have on our radar. So, what is, let's get our helmets on, ready to prepare for the next round of employment law changes. What can we expect?
The we've touched on most of the ones that have come in recently. I mean, what I would say is that now is a really good time to be going through your employment contracts and your policies.
Yeah.
If you don't have a policy on carers leave, get that in. Neonatal leave, get that in now. Make sure your flexible working policy is up to date. We know that the biggest changes that are potentially going to come through are from the employment rights bill, and they are wide ranging. Now, we don't know which of them are definitely going to come through because it's still got quite a lengthy process to go through. We've got a lot of consultations that are planned, but the things that I think that we do and can certainly be doing, and probably should be doing anyway, is reviewing our contracts. Let's make sure that those contracts are compliant. We've got all of the mandatory information in them. If they're not, then if they're not compliant, or if we know that there is a big contractual change coming up, then let's go through the consultation and get those done. So, ahead of any legislation that comes in and says you can't fire and rehire. I think the one thing as well is that we know that there's a very strong indicator that it's going to be harder to dismiss employees. So at the moment we've got 2 years, unless there's obviously one of the automatically unfair reasons. And I would suggest that we're making sure that we are looking at our contracts and making sure there's probationary periods in there that can be extended that allow you to dismiss. There is nothing is guaranteed, but I think we can get ourselves into a pretty strong position if we're looking at what are the business needs now and in the next 6 to 12 months. We have the bill now. We can see what potentially is going to come. Management need to make decisions about whether we move forward. We as HR professionals, you will obviously be guiding organisations through those processes. But I think because of the lack of clarity and the lack of certainty, I think it's quite difficult. As I say, at the moment, I'm saying, look, check you've got your ducks in a row in terms of your policies. Make sure you've got your training done, and it's all audited, recorded. And that your contracts give you plenty of flexibility whilst also being very clear about employees' obligations and rights.
So just preparing for not for the worst, preparing yourself in the eventuality of ongoing changes and things like that, because non-compliance is serious and it will be the thing that causes problems. So just staying on top of it. Do you think that is going to happen? Do you think we are going to keep seeing things trickling through? Obviously, amendments to the bill. When will it end?
When will it end? I think that we know that there's the government plans to consult on many of its proposed revisions, and then it'll go through the government. I think that if we, as HR practitioners, as employment solicitors, if there is a public consultation and we can participate, if we can put forward our comments or our votes, whether it's through a professional organisation, representative office or individually, then that's a really good obligation because the government wants to know how these proposals could affect organisations of all sizes. It's not just about the big companies, it's about the small organisations that are thinking, this is going to damage us. But I think the earliest we're going to get anything through actually passed is probably, or actually implemented, is going to be 2026. There's suggestions it might even be autumn 2026. We've got time, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have any certainty for quite a few months yet, unfortunately.
The one thing we can be sure of is there will be some changes and we will have to get on board with that. So that's just the way it is. That's how we manage employment law in this country. So I think we've covered pretty much everything that we wanted to there. I'm really happy that we got through quite a lot, didn't we? And you're obviously a mine of information on these things. So I really appreciate your time today. So I'll wrap up there and say thank you very much to Maria. And we will be back for another podcast next month. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by HRreview.co.uk. HRreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up and follow us on Twitter at HRreview or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.